People in America are going hungry, forced to buy and eat contaminated food under Biden's approval, and Congress is pressing regulators to impose new mandates that will affect 99.9% of all these people, essentially making everyone criminals and guilty until proven innocent.
That sounds fun.
First up, we got to set the record straight and get this out in the open. So to clarify, the difference between a law versus a mandate. Now, this is a discussion we were having earlier, and you said?
I said that a mandate in the scheme of things is just as bad, if not worse, than a law. A mandate you don't have to vote on. It's just done. A law has to be voted on.
So according to sr23.senate.ca.gov, this is some senator in the 23rd Senate District. This is March of last year. Law by legislation versus mandate. What is the difference? During the pandemic, we received a very up close and personal education in the different types of law. We heard and read about mandates, executive orders, and laws. Many of the people I've met with weren't clear on the differences between them, and this confusion is something that I feel important to address, especially during this already trying time. That was last year. I still think it's a trying time.
I agree.
And it's going to really, really kind of come full circle when we get to the rest of these talking points. But generally, they are all the same thing and carry the same power of enforcement. The main difference between them lies in their origin. In government, the legislative branch of government, Congress, state senates, and assemblies create and pass legislation, which upon signature by a governor become law. It's generally a lengthy, deliberative process measured in months, even years. And think of laws passed that regulate educational or safety standards, criminal laws, and courts and taxes. The executive branch of government, president, governor, creates and enacts mandates via executive orders, and local government jurisdictions are responsible for enforcement. California governors have declared states of emergencies many times over the years, most often in response to a flood, wildfire, earthquake, or some other natural disaster. The declaration immediately opens the door for the state to access a variety of federal assistance and funds. The governor's authority under emergency powers is broad, and mandates are fast and easy to implement, which is why they tend to be a crucial tool in rapidly changing situations such as emergencies. However, speed is a double-edged sword. It may lead to costly, even fraudulent contracts and inconsistent policies, all of which we observed occurring during the pandemic and still today. Mandates also may be put in place by a government agency, often a state or local health agency or Department of Emergency Services. Think of the mask mandates during the pandemic. These types of mandates generally need a reason for their introduction, such as a declaration by the governor of a health emergency or natural disaster, and upon the lifting of the emergency declaration, the mandate is revoked. Local health authorities' powers during an emergency also are very broad. They can exceed the mandate or guidance measures established by the governor. Employers and businesses also have significant latitude to exceed mandates or guidance, and they can't do less, but they can do more. For example, businesses may require employees and patrons to continue masking or provide proof of vaccination or a recent negative test weeks or months past the pandemic receding. And when a state of emergency is declared, a legislative body may opt to cede certain of its powers to the executive branch for a temporary period, generally to streamline decision-making and spending during a significant emergency. In March of 2020, the legislature voted to suspend its legislative proceedings due to the pandemic state of emergency, and in effect, Newsom was empowered to govern by decree. And between March 12, 2020 and early February 2022, he issued 87 executive orders. And in comparison, he issued 17 executive orders in total in 2019. A little power hungry there, right? And according to state law, the governor should proclaim the termination of the state of emergency at the earliest possible date that conditions warrant. And if the governor doesn't terminate the state of emergency, the legislator may do so via a concurrent resolution declaring it ended. Now, interestingly enough, you said earlier today, you said how the mandates are imposed. And even laws being voted on aren't voted on by us.
Correct. And the mandates aren't put into place by us.
The mandates just happen faster.
Now, the reason this is brought up is because I have a video on Squirrel Tribe where I was talking about the net zero carbon mandates that will go into effect in 2030 and will go into effect in 2025, and with the timeline of being done by, or what is the right word here?
Fully enforced,
I guess, by 2030. And there's a lot of people going, mandate is not law. Mandate is not law. And I need people to understand mandate is worse than law in a lot of cases. Because based on this, a mandate can be done like that, and it's enforced. Whereas a law has to be voted on. It could take months. It could take years.
Give me an example of what they would be arguing in regard to a mandate is not the same as law.
Well, they're saying that they can mandate that you do these things to your home, but it's not a law, so you don't have to. Well, here's the thing. The last thing that was mandated, which was and if you did not do it, you lost a job. It wasn't a law, but if you did not follow the mandate, you lost your job.
Or you couldn't go to a restaurant, or you couldn't board a plane.
You do these other things. And now with the net zero carbon emission for your homes, if you don't align or follow the mandate, who's to say they don't take your home? Like, it's a mandate. It is something that still is required to be done.
And the governor is going to have extreme control over this, but also depending on maybe it says businesses too. And if you want to know who has an overreaching authority that goes uncontested, it's a homeowners association. Okay.
And it says here, they can't do less than what is mandated, but they can do more than what is mandated. So even if you don't want to follow with what is mandated, you may still be pushed to do even more than that.
Yeah. And with that, we're going to dive into one of the stories here. I was going to save it for last, but I'm just going to go ahead and knock it out real quick. And this is from The Guardian. No more drunk driving? ? Well, U.S. automakers forced to adopt a life-saving tech by 2024. It's just weeks away, folks. We talked about this just a little bit on the live stream today, but this story here actually kind of makes it a little bit more scary. U.S. auto safety regulators announced Tuesday that they had begun the process that would eventually force car makers to adopt new technology to prevent intoxicated drivers from starting vehicles. We talked about this a little bit last year, I think.
So we have breathalyzers in every car?
I think we talked about this just a little bit last year, or maybe early this year, but this is moving forward, and it's moving forward pretty quickly. U.S. auto safety regulators announced Tuesday that they had begun the process that would eventually force car makers to adopt new technology to prevent intoxicated drivers from starting vehicles. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking to start gathering information and public comments on how to develop, legally require, and deploy technology to prevent impaired people from firing up their vehicles. And I quote, "Please bring your best ideas, your research. Let's join together to advance as quickly as we can the next technology in impaired driving prevention," end quote. According to the Deputy Transportation Secretary, Polly Trottenberg, the NHTSA's regulatory notice summarizes existing research and details what technological advancements would be needed to finalize regulations and options for potential rules, citing blood alcohol content detection, impairment detection, driver monitoring, or a combination, which we talked about driver monitoring with the Teslas and their autopilot functions and features. But guess what? This is for everybody, no matter if you have a Tesla or not. In 2021, Congress directed the NHTSA to mandate a passive technology to try to avert more than 10,000 road deaths annually. In 2021, 13,384 people died in alcohol-impaired driving traffic deaths. The most recent statistics available. The law requires a technology safety standard by November of 2024 if the technology is ready. A number of technologies currently under development could potentially fit the bill, including breath or touch-based sensors to detect alcohol. And I remember originally we were talking about this, and literally your gear shifter selector or your push to start button would essentially be able to detect your blood alcohol level. Another potential option is using cameras to monitor eye movements to try to determine whether drivers are intoxicated. And some sentences for driving under the influence require those convicted to install a breathalyzer in their cars that prevent them from starting the vehicle if alcohol is detected. Though regulators said it's unlikely future ubiquitous technology would be as intrusive as requiring a puff every time. But in the 1970s, Congress mandated that cars not start without a buckled seatbelt, but withdrew the statute soon after it became law. Mandates and laws, folks. Interestingly enough, they're putting forth a lot of effort to avert more than 10,000 road deaths annually.
Out of how many billions of people that are out there?
I'm just saying, like, this is a huge push. I'm sure this is going to be very profitable for some people to avert 10,000 deaths annually. And
they don't worry about the number of homeless deaths or drug overdose deaths or anything else like that. Or we're worried about the driving ones.
Or the deaths that they're associated with in Gaza by funding and providing and sending aid to Israel to cause massive bombings and attacks on literally everybody.
Don't forget Ukraine also.
Seeing an alcohol detecting steering wheel in your next Uber ride might be a long way off, though. NHTSA's notice said that the agency must be assured the technology works consistently before it can require it, and then give automakers at least 3 years to implement it once it finalizes the rules.
Why do we have a longer test period and stricter requirements for this than we did for other things that we were mandated to do?
No, Pfizer, you're cool. You said it's ready?
We'll take it.
Send it out.
Everything else, though, we're going to hoops and whatever.
And it says here, we are trying to see, can we get it done? Does the technology exist in a way that is going to work every time, said Ann Carlson, the acting NHTSA administrator, adding that public acceptance of the technology would depend on its accuracy. But I don't think that public acceptance matters. I think it comes down to the mandates and the laws that would be passed and pushed through by Congress.
Yes. Because once again, we don't get to vote on those laws and we don't get to have a say in the mandates.
Unless you're in politics.
Yes.
Carlson said there were close to 1 billion daily driving journeys in the United States. And if it's only 99.9% accurate, you could have 1 million false positives. And those false positives could be somebody trying to get to the hospital for an emergency.
And out of 1 billion daily driving, we have 10,000 deaths a year. Again, a lot of push towards something that technically affects 0.0000001% of the population. But you know what?
They're priorities.
You know how they
They're
like
priorities,
to
folks.
affect the smallest percentage of the population.
Tess Rowland, the president of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MAD, said that the group was very pleased with NHTSA's launch. And we understand we still have a mountain to climb, Rowland said. Victims and survivors are not going to let this die.
No pun intended.
No pun intended. Carlson will tell a U.S. House of Representatives committee on Wednesday that U.S. traffic deaths fell 4.5% in the first 9 months of the year after sharply rising during the C-19 pandemic. And, quote, while we are optimistic that we're finally seeing a reversal of the record high fatalities seen during the pandemic, this is not a cause for celebration.
You do hear the irony there. Record high fatalities during the pandemic, in the times where we're all supposed to stay at home, places were closed, not supposed to go do anything. Then we had record high fatalities. Where were people going? Where were people drinking? What was happening?
They were all deemed essential.
Okay.
I don't believe it. I don't believe half of what they're saying.
No.
I don't believe their motives. I do believe that they will try to do whatever they can possibly and enforce new laws and mandates
And
that
call it for the safety of those driving drunk.
are not only going to literally create this criminal-like mentality of every time you get into a car, you have to prove that you haven't done something wrong. And at a cost, because it's not going to be a free option.
No.
Meanwhile, we'll see where their priorities really are. We'll see where their priorities really are because I don't even know which one I want to go with first. I'm going to go with Democrat senator takes action to reverse Biden admin's move, endangering our food supply. The Biden administration has this one backwards, Democratic Senator John Tester says. And the Democratic Montana Senator John Tester is joining forces with Republican Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota to introduce legislation blocking the Biden administration from allowing beef imports that he says could contain a disease impacting U.S. food supplies.
You know, we import a lot of beef from Australia.
We import a lot of food.
We import a lot of food. We get chickens from China, beef from Australia, pigs from Hong Kong, lots of stuff from everywhere.
Yeah, so this one is a little bit concerning that Biden is allowing for food to be imported into the United States that could contain a disease impacting the overall food supply, especially, you know, if you allow our food to be contaminated, then our food then becomes contaminated too.
Yeah.
And he says, let's see here, Tester and Rounds announced late Tuesday that they would introduce a Congressional Review Act resolution that would overturn the Department of Agriculture's USDA decision to lift a longstanding ban on beef imports from Paraguay. The USDA is expected to implement the decision as soon as Thursday over opposition from Tester, Rounds, and U.S. livestock industry groups, which have pointed to the South American nation's history of cattle disease.
You have to think there was a ban for a reason at some point.
Why would we import beef from Paraguay if they have a history of cattle disease?
Because they want to say that, one, it'll help lift the price, raise the price of what we are purchasing. I couldn't think of the right word there to save my life. But also because they don't want us to grow our own food anymore.
Oh, boy.
They'd rather use that land to let, Vietnamese companies and Chinese companies come in and build batteries.
Well, I did see somewhere that Biden is taking control of like 10 million acres in Alaska. I don't know what he's doing with it. But
there's a new pipeline there.
Oh, great. For what reason?
Oil.
To then sell to other countries?
I don't know, especially since COP28 said no more oil. So I'm not quite sure.
The Biden administration has this one backwards. Resuming beef imports from a country with a recent history of foot and mouth disease is bad news for both Montana consumers and producers. And this is according to Tester in a statement that he made on Tuesday. So this just came out December 13th. So that was today. Montana ranchers work hard to produce. He said it on Tuesday.
Okay.
He said it on Tuesday. Montana ranchers work hard to produce the best quality beef in the world, and it's clear that the USDA doesn't have the data to show that Paraguay meets the same animal health standards. The Montana senator continued, I'm willing to take this fight to the Senate floor because it's clear that bureaucrats in Washington are endangering our food supply while giving a raw deal to American ranchers and consumers. Like literally, you're screwing over the American cattle ranchers while also endangering the people, and you've got a fellow Democrat going up against you.
You have to think about it. There's a massive push right now for global, like the climate change and everything else, and they're blaming it on cow farts. So the easiest way to get rid of that, or to bring the USA's version of climate change down, is to get rid of our cows.
Get rid of ours.
The ones that are already dead, so you don't have to worry about it.
What is the emission impact on importing enough beef or whatever you want to import in comparison to producing it here ourselves?
Don't ask questions that make sense, especially since they're trying to build ships that are also net zero whatever with all hydroelectric or whatever else, or electric ships. But also there's such a huge push for...
Yeah, because salt water does wonders with lithium ion batteries.
Yeah, there's a really big push for lab-grown, cell-cultured chicken. I can guarantee beef is next. We already have genetically modified salmon. We have genetically modified pigs. Next thing you know, it's going to be, well, nothing is real anymore. It's all a push for...
cultured lab meat. Imported cultured lab meat.
So twice as expensive for no apparent reason.
If you thought Paraguay's foot and mouth disease was bad, wait till you see what they do in their labs. No one's checking on them.
I was about to say the same thing.
So it says that Rounds added that Americans should be able to confidently feed their families beef that has met the rigorous standards required in America. But if you don't require it in Paraguay, then you can just import it and kind of like skirt around what's required in America, maybe. In November, the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service finalized regulations to allow Paraguayan beef imports and issued a series of conditions conditions importers must meet to ensure livestock diseases aren't present in shipped products. Paraguay's livestock industry has a history of foot and mouth disease, which spreads quickly among livestock and could severely threaten the U.S. economy. I think that we should really earmark this video and this date because this is going to be like super important really, really soon.
Again,
I think
he's turning it into the U.S. as its own Trojan horse, and it feels like this man is doing everything he can to bring in as many things that could take us down from the inside.
Not only, it says this foot and mouth disease can spread quickly among livestock and could severely threaten the U.S. economy, obviously, because it would then infect our livestock, which we would then theoretically want to fall back on, which we couldn't at that point because it's contaminated.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Clarkson's farm where he was having that issue with tuberculosis. So, according to a readout of a September meeting between the Paraguayan government and the White House Office of the United States Trade Representative, the two sides discussed the process to authorize the import of raw beef products, and Paraguayan officials expressed their desire to resume raw beef product trade as soon as possible.
Here's my question. How long is raw beef really good for, and how long does it take to get here from Paraguay?
I want to know what underhand backdoor under the table deal they got going on, because to have these discussions in Paraguay makes zero sense when you have American farmers here who would probably love an opportunity to continue to provide and provide what they produce and also provide for themselves and their families.
Yep.
I can't even keep reading this anymore. The USDA based their decision to allow beef imports from Paraguay on a deeply flawed risk assessment that used old data from site visits that were conducted more than 9 years ago. Paraguay has a history of FMD outbreaks, foot and mouth disease, and it's unclear if their inspection system can provide an equivalent level of safety for animal health to prevent a possible FMD outbreak on U.S. soil. Why are we proceeding with this? Unless we're going to now hear an introduction, a proposal from Biden saying we're going to send $100 million to Paraguay so they can up their meat testing.
Well, I've already said that the next thing we're going to see is the AFS or ASF. I can't remember what it's called. The thing that's going on with the pigs in Hong Kong, because we import a bunch of pig stuff, also pork and things like that. So that's the next thing you're going to see over here.
Paraguay is the last paragraph here. Paraguay has a history of FMD outbreaks. And unclear if it's going to break out on U.S. soil, but Paraguay heavily relies on private sector funding for most of its FMD mitigation measures, and the USDA did not consider the risk associated with Paraguay's economic downturn over the last several years.
And they rely on private sector funding, so basically anybody can pay for any results.
Boom. We need to do like the Hodge twins, like.
Don't hurt yourself.
I didn't hurt myself.
It sounded painful.
It wasn't very painful.
Okay.
Last
you have
one.
a bruise later, and you're like, what?
I don't think you can bruise your knee. Last one. I'm glad you're concerned, though. It sounded worse than it was.
Okay.
I felt like I was trying to make as much of an explosion here when I really didn't need to. I could do it in post. But
and you also have a table you could have hit instead.
Yeah, I would have flipped the table over. Here's the last one.
Okay.
Let's see how much the government actually cares about the American people, because NBC News shares, this was just yesterday, December 12th, and millions of parents and young kids could be denied food aid next year without a funding boost. And unless Congress acts by January 19, the WIC program could be short $1 billion in 2024 due to higher demand and pricey groceries.
Nothing surprises me. Plenty of money to aid Ukraine, although technically it's money laundering. Plenty of money to aid Ukraine by the government spending it on government companies to produce the things so they put their money back in their own pockets. But not enough money to take care of American citizens. Enough money to give illegals crossing the border money and phones and whatever else, but not enough money to take care of
They're giving them
homeless
jokers
veterans.
$5,000 across the border.
Yeah.
A long-standing federal food assistance program could be short $1 billion next year, leaving 2 million parents and young children without access to its support. A report from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities said on Tuesday, the center-left think tank called on Congress to allocate more funding for the Special Supplement Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, commonly known as WIC, citing a higher than expected demand in an economy whose surprising strengths haven't fended off a post-pandemic hunger recovery.
Now,
it's because there aren't surprising strengths.
Well, to be the person to point out some of the obvious, which a lot of people don't like to talk about, but the second you overturn Roe versus Wade and now people are forced to have kids, which I know sounds one way, but that's a conversation we can't fully have over here. You're going to see more people in need of government assistance because now they have more mouths to feed.
How about also the fact that somebody said they make $7 more an hour today than they did last year, and they're worse off now than they were before?
Yeah, because inflation is...
Yeah, there's no surprising strength here. It's a surprising manipulation of the data and the numbers and the facts and the truth. Mm-hmm. Congress has failed to provide WIC with the additional funding it needs to avoid turning away eligible young children and pregnant and postpartum adults with low incomes for the first time in decades. Ty Jones-Cox, the Vice President for Food Assistance Policy for the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, or CBPP, said on a conference call Tuesday, and I think earlier this year they wiped out the PEBT, pandemic boost.
Yeah.
They're trying to make people go hungry.
I think it was in May of this year.
They're trying to starve out people. Mm-hmm. They're trying to starve out broke, hungry people. Like literally, like that's what it is. Like this content and videos of before about wiping out the middle class. This is it, folks. Like if you were unclear on what that meant, this is it. And hang on 1 second. We gotta do this. It's getting a little dark here. Hang on. Funny how that works. Yeah. So the stopgap funding bill that President Joe Biden signed on November 17 to head off a government shutdown included $6 billion in WIC funding for 2024, but CBPP projects that the program will need up to $7.3 billion to meet the expected demand, and lawmakers have until the next budget deadline of January 19 to lock in additional money. Now, is this because of how many people are on it, or is this because of how much more expensive food is?
Yes.
Yes. I think it's more so.
I think it's yes.
Yeah. I think it's more so.
The cost of food versus the people on it, but still.
Congress shouldn't let us even come this close to this point, Cox said, and we are a wealthy nation that can afford to make sure that toddlers have milk and vegetables. And honestly, we're a wealthy nation that can afford to assure that Paraguayans can import beef into this country because that's more important than taking care of our own.
We like to take care of other countries first and worry about ourselves second.
More than half of all infants in the U.S. receive benefits through the WIC program, which provides supplemental nutrition aid, counseling, and referrals to other services. The urgency for action cannot be overstated, said Georgia Matchell, interim president and CEO of the National WIC Association. Ensuring WIC's long-term stability and maintaining the trust of its participants hinge on Congress's willingness to bolster its support. A spokesperson for the Agriculture Department, which administers WIC, called the CBPP report one more piece of evidence that without the necessary additional funding, millions of eligible pregnant women, new mothers, infants, and young children are at risk of missing out on critical aid. The spokesperson said the White House is holding a media call Wednesday, which was today, to highlight the issue.
I feel like there's so many ways they can fix all of this, yet they just refuse to because I don't know why that's what bothers me.
I'm honestly thrown for a loop because I have thoughts and opinions about this that I don't want to go into because it takes you down like a completely different rabbit hole where if you have 100 women and 10 men on a deserted island in 100 years, you would have a thriving
community
of men, women, and boys and girls.
But if you have 100 people who think they're women but biologically aren't, and 10 men, in 100 years you'll just have 110 skeletons of men. Yeah.
So I'm confused because it's like they push that so hard, yet
the problem is we're spending so much money towards that, and instead of taking care of actual women and children.
Well, then we'll have a reduction of that. That's what it is. There will be less women, infant, and children.
Yes. It's men ruling the world.
There will be less
men in dresses ruling the world.
Even though they say that they are, there will be less women.
Well, there's only one thing that's actually a woman, but we're not doing that here.
Yeah. So policy experts said that WIC's funding needs have grown in recent years due to rising food costs and the expiration of pandemic-era benefits that had fortified Americans' wallets and refrigerators. And in 2022, the USDA found that 12.8% of households were food insecure, up from 10.2% in 2021. And I will say that 2024 is probably going to be the most challenging year for people with food insecurities for the rise in price.
Yep.
The fact that pretty much the economy should be trending in a direction where prices should be falling.
Especially when you're bringing in over 1 million new people a year through your southern border.
Which I discussed a little bit about rent prices and things like that, but ultimately the prices should be coming down, but food isn't. And even Doug McMillan, Walmart CEO, was like, it ain't gonna happen. And also the 3.7 or 6% increase to COLA, all the numbers are lagging behind.
Yeah.
But you kind of miss the dip.
Well, I mean,
you want to buy the dip.
Yeah.
And that's where you're gonna. Yeah. But I think you missed the dip because as the prices like shot up, then the economy improved and inflation came down. Now they can provide you with less in the form of a cost of living adjustment, but food and energy aren't calculated in those numbers, and they're still trending up while your increase is trending down.
Well, I mean, they tell you, well, be happy. You got a 3.6% increase this year. Okay, cool. Well, everything else increased 17.2%. So what is that 3.6 going to do for me?
Everything else increased 17% on paper, but 30% in reality.
Or to 150% depending on what you're looking at in the grocery stores. I mean, some of those things doubled.
No, you're absolutely right. You know, it's like chicken used to be $1.99 a pound.
And then it went up to almost $4 and change, sometimes $6 depending. Eggs, you used to be able to get a dozen for $1.28, we'll say. And then when everything kind of went to hell in a handbasket, you were paying $5 for a dozen eggs.
Yeah, it's wild. It's crazy.
But inflation's not that big.
And 2024 is going to be a beast because you got to think, you're not going to have any possibility, if you're relying on these government programs, you're not going to have any possibility for any improvement until 2025. And that's going to be based on whatever manipulation of the numbers that happen in 2024.
And this is where I'm going to sound like the bad guy when I say find ways to not need to rely on the government for your existence.
So she sounds like a bad guy, but she's not really a bad guy?
If you've seen Wreck-It Ralph, it makes sense.
Demands on WIC would be even greater if more eligible Americans used it. Ooh, that's not good. The USDA has said that the program reaches just over half of those who qualify, citing a lack of awareness and recipients' difficulties in attending required appointments. In this fiscal year, WIC participants hit 6.57 million people, around 178,000 more than in 2019, according to USDA records. And if more of these people who would qualify find out about it and begin to pursue it, it only makes matters worse.
They're trying to say it'll make it better, but it definitely will not. It won't. They're saying that there would be more money for it if they really thought more people needed it. But if you can't even supply enough money for it for the people who show that they do need it, what makes you think they're going to give more money? That doesn't make sense. That kind of math does not math.
So it says that monthly costs per participant have risen to from $40.9 per person in 2019 to $55.95 today.
That should show you exactly what inflation really is. That over the last 3 years, you have gone up $16 per person in order to get government assistance. Imagine what that is without the government assistance. You have to think about that, though. Without it, it's even higher.
The CBPP said that the end of emergency SNAP benefits earlier this year and the lapse of the expanded child tax credit contributed to driving up WIC rolls. These are the facts, ladies and gentlemen. This is what's happening. This is what's coming down the pipe. This is our government. This is, unfortunately, a clear indication to get the hell out of the damn way because they're not coming to save you. Like that light at the end of the tunnel is a damn...
It's the train coming at you.
Yeah.
That sucks.
I can tell you my problems, meditating my silence. But I keep pushing my pen, rotating my stylus. Brokenness feeling like sin, now no breath, low dollar. Used to be left on red, now all the girls go holler. Now all the girls go follow. All the fake friends go pop.